What was the best move that the Dallas Cowboys made this offseason? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, it's Wednesday. How you doing today, sir?
Good. Hump day. We're trying to get through the week as we get closer and closer to the holidays and closer to another Cowboys football game. This one's on the road against a Jacksonville team that's looking pretty good. I'm excited to talk about that in the next few days, but we've got questions, and that's
Yes.
always the topic of the day whenever that's on the plate.
Yeah, we got three really good questions. And let's start with this one. It comes from Goran. He wants to know, now that we've had some time, what 2022 offseason move has worked out the best for the Cowboys so far?
So, you and I had a conversation before the show kind of talking about some of these things. I'm going to throw a curveball here a little bit. I think, and honestly, I don't know how much the Cowboys get credit for this, though they should, some, but and how do we rephrase this? The re-signing or the extension of DeMarcus Lawrence?
Oh, that's a good one. Yes, the extension. That's what it was.
Yeah, so I really feel like, there was definitely conversation for, you remember this, like a week or a week and a half, where there was conversation about the fact that DeMarcus Lawrence might get released,
and it
or
sounds
traded.
like they were seriously considering just outright releasing him in favor of keeping Randy Gregory at a bigger number.
So, and honestly, we could kind of all wrap this into honestly, I think we could have a whole conversation about the best thing they did in the offseason is, and whether half of it was luck or, half of it is,
a lot of it was luck. Let's just be honest.
for sure. Absolutely. Is the general way that they handle the defensive ends this offseason. I mean, we could lump in. I think the most important thing they did, like I said, is re-signing DeMarcus Lawrence, having D-Law at the current contract rate that he's at, while opening up more money, potentially what was supposed to go to Randy Gregory initially, but eventually went on to Dante Fowler, to Dorrance Armstrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that ended up being absolutely massive because that single move, obviously kept DeMarcus on your team, kept D-Law on your team, potentially added Dorrance Armstrong. It really was going to be the thing that you needed if you were even hoping to sign Randy Gregory, which ended up not happening. But then after that, obviously, the other things that it opened up for roster-wise, DeMarcus Lawrence has been playing as good a football this year as he has any year, has been as clutch as he has been any year. And the fact that the Cowboys were able to reduce his salary this year before such an incredible season, I mean, it was underreported at the time. It was kind of, just seemingly procedural when it was announced.
It wasn't.
But it absolutely
There was a
not.
lot of hard feelings there on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to kind of have that soothe over, to keep DeMarcus for, a couple more years, and to, like I said, to free up some cash to kind of help the flexibility of this defensive line, which has become, such a stalwart for this team, such a main part of this team's identity, that it's hard to argue with that move. I mean, I think there were some other ones that worked out as well, but I think that one kind of opened the door for several other really big moves the Cowboys made.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that one, but I think you're right. I mean, just like he's been doing all season long, DeMarcus Lawrence saves their bacon, right? Like when they absolutely needed a hero, Lawrence does it. Like, Lawrence did not need to take a pay cut. He would have gotten paid on the open market. I mean, he's a Pro Bowl defensive end. He had all these skins on the wall. He played really well last year when he came back from the injury. He did not need to take a reduced salary. He did anyways, and look how it's benefited them. here was the plan, right? If they cut DeMarcus Lawrence, they were going to sign Randy Gregory, which they wanted to do anyways. And if they couldn't get Gregory, they were going to go out and try to get somebody like Von Miller, maybe not at the rate that Buffalo was going to pay Von Miller, but something similar. And Lawrence has outperformed all those guys this year, right? I mean, even when Von was healthy, Lawrence has been better. And that's what's crazy about the whole thing. So, yeah, that move allowed them to keep Dorrance Armstrong. It probably allowed them to keep Jaron Kearse as well. It probably allowed them to keep Leighton Vander Esch, who I was going to mention, bringing him back on like a 1-year, $4 million deal. I think you're right, Leighton. I think it's Lawrence.
And the other thing too is like I said, it opened the door for allowing Dorrance Armstrong eventually as well if they wanted to sign. I mean, once Randy Gregory was not part of it, and Dorrance Armstrong's been such a huge part of this team, and such a stable element of this pass rush. So I mean, it was a huge move at the time. We were thrilled about it at the moment for sure, because
we were
during
worried
the
that he was
offseason
going to be gone. We just worried that he wasn't going to be here.
Beyond that too, it just felt like the team had needed some kind of win in the offseason. And that was before we still were hoping that Randy Gregory was going to get signed. That's actually why this all happened, was to kind of initially free up some money for us to sign Gregory. But it ended up being so much more than money to sign Gregory. I mean, especially with the way DeMarcus Lawrence is playing, it was a huge move for the Cowboys. And listen, anybody who John Owning's got it covered, so I'm not worried about it. But anybody that's a fan of this team that doesn't like DeMarcus Lawrence, get out of here. Seriously, like D-Law is like huge heart and the soul of this team. And
Micah Parsons is their best player on defense, I think, by a lot, right? But Lawrence is their emotional leader, and he's kind of the guy that whenever they need a play, he's there to make it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
we talked about it. I can't remember if you and I were talking about this on the pod or not, but I think maybe it was, but just the progression of his career and like that forced fumble that he got in the playoff game in Detroit really, really changed the trajectory of his career 100%. In a way that's really, really fascinating to watch.
All right, let's get to some more questions. But before we do that, we wanted to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. All you have to do is add your job in the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. And then they'll ask you simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We also want to let you know about Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion available right now as a bonus episode on Locked On Presents. Think Like a Champion is a brand new podcast from Russell Wilson and Audible. Russ is a champion on the field, but off it, we rarely know the grind to the path to greatness. Russell Wilson, alongside co-host Harry Wilson and Trevor Moawad, dig into how high-performance athletes, artists, and leaders push the boundaries of their potential. You'll hear from people like Von Miller, who we just talked about, deliver sharp insights about performing at your highest level in moments of extreme pressure. You'll hear from NCAA champions like Tim Tebow. You'll hear from Olympic medalists, NFL stars, and business leaders. Available for free on Audible or wherever you get your podcasts. Head over to Locked On Presents for a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcast, available everywhere right now. Audible, get in the game. All right, Landon, let's get to some more questions. This is a really good one from Eamon. He wants to know, what is the biggest concern going forward? The lack of depth at cornerback or the offensive line?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of unknown right now. That's why it's a little bit hard to answer the question. I think we got some answers last weekend with the cornerback depth. We saw how Joseph and Bland played. I thought that for the most part, Joseph played pretty well. He obviously gave up a big play that, again, I think was an incomplete pass if I'm being honest. But I think for the most part, playing in phase, not getting burnt, terribly and playing,
Tackling well.
That's the plus thing. He is a plus physical player. He's going to be a more physical player than Anthony Brown. He's going to be a better tackler on the field. So that part I think is an improvement, which is not the more important part, obviously. But I think the coverage part, like you see a guy who's very natural. He has so much natural ability here. It's crazy. He's just very good about staying in phase. He's very good at staying with people. He's sticky. So those are all positive things. He just needs to work on finishing. He needs to work on kind of the finer details of it. So I have hope there. Nashawn Wright is obviously the guy. I mean, look, Joseph and Bland are starters at this point. So we're talking about the down roster guys. So we're talking about Nashawn Wright, who got some snaps on the field on defense last week, was fine. Didn't necessarily, cause any problems or make any plays. After that, you've got Sheffield and Mackenzie Alexander, who are two guys that they signed during the season this year.
I just get worried after their top three.
Yeah, well, look, you've lost two of your starting corners, and then on top of that, you've replaced them with two guys, and you feel fine about your top three right now. You don't feel great. You feel fine. But I think that's more than most teams can hope for.
I mean, it's
right?
It's normal across the league, right?
Yeah, this is you've already lost two starters at the cornerback position. So am I concerned about the depth? Yes, because the depth after the guys that are playing on the field is basically street free agents.
Well, and that's why the answer for me is secondary, right? Like,
yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, I'm knocking on wood right now. Can you imagine if Diggs goes down for 3 weeks? Right?
No, that would be bad. And look, he's already got two hurt hands, So yeah, it would be terrible. It would be awful. I think that, the Cowboys would be in a lot of trouble if one of the tackles got hurt now. The Cowboys would be in trouble if they lost a guard. But I just don't think that I think that they've already been stretched that level of thin at cornerback. And, it's an interesting comparison because I compare these two groups all the time, right? Yeah. Because it's always about not who the best player you have in these units, but the worst player. Yeah. So I think with the defensive backfield, we're already kind of at the point where one more level deep, you're probably going to start getting into trouble. I think the Cowboys can work around what they've got, even if they lost one more tackle. They can
it's because
help with protections or do some other things there.
I mean, listen, Steele was playing really well this year, but you're getting Tyron Smith back. Let's just call that a wash, right? I mean, there's a good chance that it's not a wash because Tyron's just a better player, right? But you're not really, quote unquote, losing a player from a week ago. A corner, you would be, right? You've already lost two for the season. You're not getting any of those guys back. That's the spot that makes me really nervous. And I think somebody like Bland, if Bland were to pull a hammy or whatever, and you've got to pull, Kendall Sheffield off the practice squad, I just worry that when you get into some of these playoff games, teams are going to be able to attack it, right? And we've seen Tom Brady, because it's most likely matchup the Cowboys are going to have in round one, say, okay, here's Chris Godwin against Kendall Sheffield on 14 targets. Good luck, right? That's what makes me nervous.
Absolutely. And like we said, it's about the weakest link, and especially when you get into the playoffs, that gets accentuated. So DB is a spot where you can't really afford maybe more specifically, corner is a spot where you can't afford.
Yeah, I mean, they could survive an injury at safety pretty easily.
Yeah, and honestly, even if they lost a nickel, for a couple of games or something, they may even be able to survive that because of the safeties they have and the formations they're able to play. But it wouldn't be good long term, and it certainly wouldn't be good to lose another outside corner.
And it just depends on the matchup, right? Like against the 49ers, if you're playing the 49ers from round one for whatever reason, your nickel corner is probably not going to be super valuable just because they don't use a lot of 3 receiver sets, right?
But you probably want a bigger guy to tackle anyways. That
right. You probably want to be playing Wilson, Curse, and Hooker on the field a bunch. Right. Now against Tampa Bay, that's going to be using 4 and 5 receiver sets. That's when it can become a problem a little bit. Really quickly on the offensive line,
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you again because I asked you last week. Are we sure that Tyler Smith is going to start at left guard when Tyron Smith comes back?
Yeah. I mean, I would think that the other option now is, do you consider moving him to right tackle? I mean, like outside of that, like I think he's playing good enough that he needs to be on the field, like and over Connor McGovern. Maybe they do a rotation.
So as well, but once again last week we saw it was I think one or two series where Jason Peters was at left tackle and Connor McGovern was at left guard.
Yeah, I think that they, look, I think that I think that they're very honed in on the idea that they like position flex for these guys. But I think that the difference between that concept this year and last year is that I feel like they may have learned their lesson a little bit, that moving these guys just on a whim without kind of easing them into that situation and creating that kind of muscle memory is dangerous for these players. It's the same reason why I have my mentions filled with folks yelling at me about how could you even consider to put Josh Ball on the field when you have Jason Peters? Well, because I want Jason Peters to continue playing football for the rest of the season, trying to shove him out into right tackle when he hasn't played right tackle in many, many years and making him reverse, muscle memory at 41 years old. That's a great way to get injured. I mean, look, if I eat with my left hand, I pull a muscle. So I can only imagine what this guy's going through.
Well,
so
I also have to believe in the back of Dallas's mind, they're probably wondering, okay, Tyron Smith hasn't played in a long time. He hasn't been the model of health. What if we need Jason Peters to still play at left tackle in round one of the playoffs?
Yeah.
So,
I think you want, I think even no matter what happens with the offensive line, I think the plan is to continue to play McGovern at some point, right? Like whether it's a fullback role, a tight end, or, maybe rotating in, like just to kind of give guys a break. It hasn't. Here's what I'll say. The concern with rotating offensive linemen is that usually there's a detrimental, problem with your offensive line's continuity. The Cowboys have been doing this basically the entire season
and
last year. And at this point, not last year, but at this point, it doesn't seem to have had the same sort of negative effects that it has in last year, at least. Right.
Yeah.
I kind of think it's not the worst idea to keep these guys fresh. Like these guys are getting beat up. Like if you can spread out, it's just like the whole thing with Zeke and Pollard, man. Like
sure.
The less touches you can put on these guys' bodies by the end of the year, and then you can really lean into it, then that's the best case scenario. And I think, keeping all these guys fresh and like ready to play, it may pay dividends for the Cowboys if they do face an injury a little bit later in the season.
Not that I'm in favor of this, but I'm shocked I haven't heard more talk on Twitter about moving Zach Martin out to right tackle, playing McGovern at right guard, his best spot, and just getting your 5 best offensive linemen on the field when Tyron's healthy.
I think it makes sense, right? And honestly, we can have the whole conversation about how McGovern's best spot is right guard and how, Zach obviously played really well at right tackle. But look, Zach was not shy about talking about how he hated playing right tackle. And I think that a lot of it is because of what happened, right? And that he hurt himself, playing at right tackle. Yeah. And I think that again points back to what we're talking about, that it's one thing to ask these guys to do something that they're not used to doing, but to ask them to do it for like a full load of 60 snaps a game or whatever, that's really where I think can be detrimental. I think there needs to be a load management aspect of this if you're going to be rotating folks, because it's
I could see them doing that. I could see him doing it in a playoff game if something were to happen. Like if Josh Ball was having one of those Chaz Green type of games and Peters isn't healthy or whatever, like I could see that, right? So let's just get our 5 best guys on there. San Francisco's killing us up front. We need to do it for the second half of a game to go win it. I could see that. I don't see it happening this week or next week or whatever. I don't see it happening in a regular season game anymore.
I think that's the thing that people need to realize, is that the Cowboys still have 4 games left, right? 4 games, right? Is it
Yeah.
3 games? 4
A
games.
quarter
left?
of the season still left to figure things out, right?
They've got to get through the rest of the season. Like I understand everyone's looking at the playoff odds right now, and the Cowboys are at 90 whatever percent to make the playoffs. And frankly, they can actually, I think, get a playoff spot this weekend without winning a game if a couple teams lose correctly. But the point is that you still have to survive to the playoffs. You have to play 4 games without occurring a whole bunch more injuries so that you are at your best when playing in the playoffs. So the idea of rotating folks to make sure to limit their exposure a little bit, it's appealing to me a little bit because I want the most important thing to me is not beating Jacksonville on Sunday. The most important thing to me is winning in the first round of the playoffs and then getting to the second round of the playoffs. Right. So
I agree.
Whatever we need to do to get our best team to that spot, I'm on board.
All right. We've got one more question to get to, but I'm going to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup, they've got you covered at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, and we know that you do because you're listening to one right now, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. It's always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, last question, Landon. This one from Bill. He wants to know, what is the team seeing or not seeing in wide receiver Jalen Tolbert? Is he a bust? Is he not working hard? Does he not understand the game? I don't hear as much about him as I'd like to, and I'd like to know if he fits into their future plans.
I think he does. Look, I mean, the reason they signed T.Y. Hilton is that they needed a veteran wide receiver who understands, how to beat zone coverage, how to run a route to get open versus cover 3, how to subtly adjust your route to make the cornerback play off you a little bit. They needed more experience in facing some of these, zone coverage stuff. The problem with Tolbert is that he needs experience. It's not that he, that he's not good enough or he's not talented enough. The problem is that he's just a very young football player. And I mean that in the sense of how long he's been playing football. So I think, we saw things in training camp that certainly, made us excited for what he could become. And then you saw him kind of hit a wall when it came down to doing the little things that you need a wide receiver to do to become ultimately successful. It's not just about getting open. It's about finishing the play, finishing the tough catch when you contest it. It's about making sure that your steps are right so that you're where you're supposed to be when you run the route. The Cowboys are having issues with that at times with guys like CeeDee Lamb and Gallup. They can't, and those guys are worth those targets. Tolbert is still a guy that you're learning to hope to get targets. So I think that they still have plans for him. I think that they still really, really like him. I think at this point it's safe to say, though, that this isn't happening this season for him.
No.
And that he needs one more year in an offseason, and let's see what we get in training camp next year. He's just not ready to play the type of football that gets played at the end of the season into the playoffs. And that's why you brought in a veteran, because you want somebody who understands what's going on here, understands how to get open versus, NFL cornerbacks, understands what defenses are trying to do to them, and then can make those decisions on the fly. You can't have a guy that's, getting having his head spin, just keeping track of what the snap count is and what his assignment is, and not even doing the little things like, noticing the coverage while you're running your route and adjusting on the fly. Those are things that you need a veteran for. So I just think his runway ran out, and at this point it's time to just set our sights to 2023 for Tolbert, just because he just didn't get the opportunity to develop the way he needed to be reliable on the field.
Yeah, I mean, don't disagree at all. I just think the expectations have changed a little bit. I think people were hoping he was going to be like the next Michael Gallup, right? A guy that you draft in the 3rd round, comes in and plays and gives you 400 yards as a rookie, and then by year 2 takes off. It's probably just not going to happen. I think a better career arc would be like what happened to Cedric Wilson, right? Where Wilson did not play at all as a rookie. In year 2, really didn't play, had 46 yards, but by year 3 and year 4 became a really solid number 4 receiver. That's probably what Tolbert's aiming for now, right? Like next year, have a strong offseason, compete for the number 3 job, find a role in the offense as, the number 4 receiver. Just probably where we're at.
And make yourself more available to special teams. I think honestly, that's another aspect of this
It's a huge part of it.
really didn't help him, is that because he has no experience playing special teams, and like you said, very
somewhere on special teams, right?
Yeah, very little just football experience in general, which is really what helps you when you're a superstar college wide receiver who comes to an NFL team and now you're the 4th wide receiver, is that, oh, well, at least I played high school football. I remember what it's like to play safety. I know how to tackle a guy.
Yep.
And then they hone that to kind of make you a good special teams player. Tolbert doesn't have any of that. So he didn't really have as much opportunity to be on the game day roster because he wasn't playing special teams. So that's another part that kind of has stunted his growth a little bit. He's not getting the opportunities to get on the field because you've got guys like Noah Brown, who are your 3rd wide receiver, who are also special teams ace, and you kind of can't afford to not have down roster wide receivers playing on special teams.
But let's just be clear. It's a big offseason for
absolutely.
Tolbert,
Absolutely.
right? He can't just – he needs to have one of those off seasons like Terrence Steele had in year 2, where he's at the facility every single day. He's in the weight room. He's running routes with Dak in the off season at Dak's house.
Cedric Wilson is a great example. Like, honestly, Cedric Wilson is that Terrence Steele of wide receivers, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, that guy that was always in the facility, was always around Dak, was always, around and doing it. So, yeah, just follow that model, and I think he'll have a great second season,
right?
Certainly compared to this.
Next year's wide receiver situation is going to be drastically different than this year, knock on wood, right? Because last year you were losing Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb had a nice year 2, but we didn't know like what he was going to be going into as a number 1 receiver. And then you had Michael Gallup with an ACL injury. Assuming those guys get through this year healthy, CeeDee Lamb will be back, coming off probably a 1,200-yard season. Michael Gallup will be a year removed from the ACL. Got to believe they're going to bring back Noah Brown. It's just going to be a much more favorable wide receiver room for everybody. So go find a role. You don't have to be a superstar. You don't need to be the number 2 receiver, but just go show that you've improved and you can get on the field. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's capable of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got no doubt. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in and making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, all the same places that you download the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Check out the crossover show tomorrow with Tony Wiggins. That's it. We already recorded it. It was a really, really fun show. He's got some interesting thoughts on how this game is going to go, and he thinks the Cowboys need to be on high upset alert.
I do too, honestly.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah. So make sure you guys are checking that out. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll see you guys next time.